Alerts are what you send to people. Alarms are what you send to, or what you get from the things, whether hardware or software. If you're expecting alarm and you don't hear it and something happens, that's way worse than I hear alarms, but I know that they're not relevant. The first paper I found about alarm fatigue was from the 50s.
Wow, 75 years ago.
So there was like a literal hockey stick motion to the number of papers written. So I was like, okay, there's something here. How do I go from enterprise IT, where I've got a career's worth of capital and connections, to healthcare where I've got zero?
Right, so let's back up.
Hey man.
Hey,
How's it going?
good. Well, let's start from the top.
Yeah.
For people that don't know, tell us about CalmWave. What are you
Sure.
doing?
Yeah, so CalmWave, we are a high-frequency deterministic operations platform masquerading as an alarm management platform for hospitals.
Okay.
It starts in hospitals in ICUs, where we are solving the problem of ICU alarm fatigue. So I'm sure you know about this problem. Either you've hopefully not been in an ICU, but at least you've seen one on TV, and you hear that incessant beeping in the background.
There's a lot of beeping, a lot of noises.
So, you know, what people think is true is that patients generate between 400 to 800 beeps per day, of which 80 to 99% are non-actionable. But we're ingesting full data streams of not just the medical records, but also the high frequency vitals and the alarms from now 8 hospitals. And we know it's actually much higher than that. It's up to 1,600 beeps a day.
Wow.
And if you think about the ramifications to, of course, nurses that are there, but patients and their family members, it's horrendous. There's
Right.
no other industry that puts up with 80 to 99% non-actionable alarms.
Right.
So this problem has existed since the 50s and has never been solved.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, really what we're talking about is an audio signal to alarm someone, right? And that,
Yep.
there's been a lot of technology that's built since that time, since the 50s, and we're still
Yeah, it's not even
audio.
Yeah, it's not even the audio signal. It's just the signal is the issue. So in this context, in this domain, healthcare, what's happening is you have the bedside device manufacturers who have created these devices. These devices serve a great purpose, right? They help you monitor the vital signs, someone's physiology, right? They tell you what's going on with this person who's usually very, very sick, right? So you need to know. They do a good job of that. Where they don't do a good job is they generate enormous numbers of non-actionable alarms. And the problem is they're looking at the context of each vital separately.
Right.
But humans are a system. Everything's a system.
Everything.
So if you're looking at just one aspect of the system and you're saying, you know, in a very robotic way,
Right.
this vital has now breached the high or low bound beep,
Right.
that creates alarm fatigue. And that's true for any domain that has sensors, because the way that it works, and this is the grand pattern that CalmWave focuses on, is that any domain that has sensors generates signals.
Yeah.
You monitor the health of those signals between upper and lower bounds. Anything that breaches those bounds in either direction will generate an alarm, whether audible or otherwise. So that's one of the ways that you can gauge whether or not a domain is operationally mature or not, is that if you see, I'll just define 2 terms really quickly. Alerts are what you send to people.
Yep.
Alarms are what you send to, or what you get from the things, whether hardware or software. Anytime you see a one-to-one association between the two, you're in trouble. That domain is operationally immature.
Right.
That was the case in enterprise IT until we solved it. And what we're doing is we're taking everything that we learned about operations and alarm management from enterprise IT for Fortune 100s,
Right.
and now using that same pattern in healthcare, where now those alarms aren't coming from software services at scale, they're coming from patient vitals.
So let's back up.
Yeah.
Because that's how you got into this.
That's right.
Right? So let's back up. What was your experience prior to?
I'm a Serial entrepreneur. This is my 6th startup. I've had some successful exits. My first startup was called Internap. It was one of the first commercial internet backbones.
Is that 90s?
It was
Early
1996.
That you had to have
Went
that
public in 1999, and it went public for 16 billion, which at the time was pretty solid.
It's pretty solid.
Yeah.
That would still be pretty solid.
It's still pretty solid. And what we were doing then is, instead of laying fiber in the ground like everybody else was doing, we actually tied it all together with software. So we connected to all of the same backbones in every one of our facilities. And then, because of the routing protocol that you use between these big networks, which is called the BGP, the Border Gateway Protocol,
Yep.
you can only control the outbound. But if you control both sides of the link, you control all of it, which means that every one of our facilities could talk to every other facility across all the 10 backbones that existed in the day. Our software would make the right choices. So
Okay.
we were using AI in 1996. And AI is just a label for a bunch of different things, right?
Right.
In that context, we were using genetic algorithms to figure out what's the best path across this immense network of paths. So that was really cool. And then my last company I sold to PagerDuty. PagerDuty is the world's largest IT operations orchestration company. And at the time of acquisition, they were focused on what I would characterize as guaranteed delivery alerting. They would make sure that if bad things happened, you could marshal your sources, right? You could
Right.
orchestrate the response to a big outage, where in that context, you could be losing millions of dollars an hour,
Yes.
right? What they didn't have was what I came in to do, because that's what my company was doing, ingesting high frequency alarms, normalizing them, suppressing the non-actionable alarms, taking the actionable alarms and important signals and grouping together into the context of an incident, which is a
Right.
container of context,
Yep.
and then sending that to PagerDuty for guaranteed delivery alerting. So as I said to Alex Solomon, the PagerDuty co-founder and former CEO, I was like, Alex, what we're doing together is peanut butter and jelly. I've got alarms, you've got alerts. Together, it's the entire enterprise IT operations workflow. So I came on board PagerDuty and I built out the team and the now pillar product offering called Event Intelligence, which is what you do with all this high frequency alarms. So it's the kind of a natural progression, right?
Right.
What I specialize in is IT operations at scale, or operations at scale, because ultimately it's all IT operations in any of these domains,
Right.
right? Same thing, same pattern.
They're all systems.
They're all systems, and they all, if you see that one-to-one association between alarms and alerts, are systems that are broken. So we took that pattern, and a lot of the CalmWave core team comes from enterprise IT, from that space, because I've worked together with them in the past and
Right.
brought them all together. It's kind of like the Blues Brothers, bringing the band back together. And so we've been able to accomplish remarkable things. Like, we're ingesting massive amounts of data now, right? So part of what we're doing in healthcare is that you have these isolated silos in healthcare. So the EMR, Epic, Oracle Cerner. But you also have the middleware that's aggregating the high frequency vitals and the alarms. But the two are isolated. And one of the things that we learned early on, as we were coming up with the concept of CalmWave and digging into it, we got some EMR data to start, doing data analysis on. And we're like, where are the vitals? We only saw a few areas where they're, like, as an example, we got access to what's called the Mimic 3 data set, which is 46,000 patients spanning 11 years worth of data.
Wow.
Of those, only 99 had high frequency vitals. And so we're like, okay, so this is weird. We started digging in, and what we realized is that there's very little high frequency vitals in the EMR, because it's only put there in the event that the doctor says, hey, I really need these 2 hours, I'm going to put it in. It's not continuous.
Got it.
And so then we were like, oh, well, we need to find that. And then it turns out that other data is ephemeral.
Meaning what?
It's gone on a rolling 30-day basis, erased forever. So what we're doing is we're fusing those two data sets in real time, normalizing into the CalmWave common signal format. It's a well-structured format designed for data science, so that our integration layer, by edict from me, nothing is passing through without being normalized into what we call QUIC, the CalmWave common signal format, which means on the inside, it's data science wonderland, because the data is already all structured, contextualized, enriched.
Right.
They get to do science on it immediately. So that's a really powerful mechanism, because that's one of the key pieces to our being able to innovate so quickly.
And why don't you think anybody had jumped on this?
It's a hard problem, man. Like here's a frame of reference of data sets that we're talking about, right? Like,
I was going to ask either
Yeah.
that question or why healthcare? Because that's tough in itself.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, here's why. So, sort of the origin story for CalmWave is I left pager duty. I went on sabbatical. And this was right before COVID, right?
Yep.
Right when the world got very different. So that was like in February, I think, of when COVID started, 20? Yeah. So February 20, went on sabbatical. COVID shut the world down in like March, right? And my wife's like, "Are you sure you want to be on sabbatical right now?" And I'm like, "Yeah."
Everybody was.
Yeah. So we ended up buying some property up in the mountains to just get out of Dodge for a bit. And the property was wildly overgrown by like 60, 70 years.
Sounds like
So,
a big project.
Yeah. So it was like, we've got 100, 150 foot Douglas firs, ponderosa pines. But then there's this stuff called vine maple, which is basically like a Pacific Northwest bamboo. Any piece of the root that stays in the ground, it pops up. So this whole property, 17 acres, was like these really good sized trees. And then up 20 feet up from the ground were vine maples. So you had like sight lines of 10 feet on this entire property because it was that thick.
Wow.
So I spent much of that sabbatical with a tractor and excavator, like pulling that stuff out. I learned how to drive an excavator on YouTube, as it turns out. It turns out you can actually rent a 15-ton excavator by calling a rental company, and a semi-truck drops it off.
You don't need any sort of license or anything? Oh, that
So that
sounds
was,
like
but
it'd
I
be
mean,
a problem.
yeah. So these vine maples, their root balls were big enough that here I was with a giant excavator, and I would be like tugging on this thing, and I ended up having like burn piles that were like 30 feet wide, 15
Wow.
feet tall, that I ended up burning. And now I've got sight lines of 200 to 300 feet, which is amazing. All the wildlife's coming back, and it's just really cool. But anyways, I digress. So the CalmWave was because during that time, I also joined Search and Rescue, just as a way of like, fulfilling my civic duty, like I
Yeah.
had time. So,
And what's search and rescue when you volunteer? Like, what level are you working at?
so the training's tough. They do the training in the winter. That's the first time I ever got hypothermia, was during the training.
Oh, I think I might have to turn around here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. This concrete truck's not going to turn around for you.
Let's make this relevant.
Yeah.
This is interesting. So the other day,
Yeah.
I'm backing up,
Yeah.
talking about signals and alarms. I'm so used to the sound that's happening, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm backing up in this parking lot, and it's a tight parking lot. And I realized after this, what happened,
Yeah.
is that I stopped looking back.
Because
I'm
you're
like,
waiting for the sound.
Because I'm waiting for the sound.
Yeah.
Sound didn't happen.
Oh,
And I
that's a
smashed.
false negative right there.
I smashed into a pole.
Oh, man.
But now I've been conditioned in this car to rely on
Yep.
these things.
Yep.
And then it didn't happen.
Right.
And I really don't like to look at the back of my car right now.
Yeah.
Because there's a big dent in it.
I mean, that's why false negatives are way worse than false positives.
Yeah. So
Right.
tell me a little bit about that, because I think that happened on purpose. Just for this show, I smashed my car for you.
Nice. Thanks so much. What a great segue. If you're expecting alarm and you don't hear it and something happens, that's way worse than I hear alarms, but I know that they're not relevant,
Right.
right? Because on the false negative case, bad things happen, like what happened to you.
Right.
Or you miss the fact that, a patient stopped breathing. So those are really, really important pieces, right? Like the false negative, false positive. And, really what we're about is building mission critical software, right? Like, back to your question, why healthcare? If you're building a new enterprise AI first product, do you really want to start with ICUs? Well, the fact of the matter is yes, because if we can succeed in ICUs, which are the most mission critical part of healthcare, then we've succeeded, right? Now we
Right.
can spread our wings into more and more mission critical areas. Yeah, not the easiest spot, but also the one where you can provide incredible value, right?
Mhm.
Because part of the issue of being in an ICU is that, patients leave ICUs worse than when they came in. You
Right.
saved their lives, but they could come out with ICU dementia.
Right.
There's all these things that can happen because of the fact that here you are in probably the worst possible condition you've been in your life because you're in the ICU. All you want to do is sleep, but you have beeps in your ear every minute, and not quiet beeps.
Right.
And that's the status quo. Like, here's this place where it's all about healing, right?
Yeah.
Keeping you alive. But at the same time, lack of sleep, like keeping somebody from sleeping, is actually a torture.
So in context of that, like what's the product look like in the future? Are we not listening to beeps and alarms? Are we digesting this data? Like, and what kind of, is it a visual format, or how is it being?
Yeah, so the way that it works is we have, we go in for alarm management. So we have a UX paradigm where we have what we call views and lenses.
Mm-hmm.
Every view is a context in the data, right? So we're ingesting all of this data from these isolated systems, we're fusing it. Like, here's the sphere of the hospital's data, hospital systems data. And every view is like, okay, I'm a clinical engineering. I want to look at the hardware alarms from these devices.
Right.
I'm a nurse. I want to set the alarm limits. I'm a doctor. I want to see the incidents associated with a patient, right? Every view is a different context in that data space. And then for every view, our UX paradigm has lenses from an individual, and that can be a patient, that can be a nurse, that can be a device, a unit, which is an aggregation of individuals, a hospital, which is an aggregation of units.
Right.
So your ability to navigate this enormous data space is foundationally tied into the UX paradigm.
Mm.
So for a nurse, what we're doing is we're providing them guidance about safe recommendations to adjust alarm limits. And what we're doing, which is unique, is that we only provide recommendations for adjustment of alarm limits when patients are stable. Today, the status quo is the opposite, because the nurses are like, holy shit, I got to shut this down. I'm trying to save this person's life, and everything's beeping all around.
Right.
I'm widening the limits,
Right.
creating false negatives.
False negatives.
Right? But instead, what we're doing is we're saying, first we're learning when a patient is unstable, which is where we cluster vital sign anomalies together, right? Hey, heart rate started doing this, and then 3 minutes later, blood pressure did this, and so on. That is like what we call a vital pattern. And if we see a vital pattern, we're hands off. So we have 5 safety gates that all must be true before we'll ever surface a recommendation. And if you look at what's happening today, right? Like the bedside device manufacturers, they've created this piece of hardware, does a great job, generates a huge amount of alarms. Why? Because these devices deploy with a set of physiological limits, the defaults, right? But defaults don't apply to every person or every population. You can't have the same high heart rate load limit for an older person versus a pediatric, neonatal or pediatrics, right?
Right.
Their heart rates are way, way faster. So here they are deploying these devices. Yeah, they make some changes sometimes. But they don't give, the device manufacturers don't give any guidance to the clinicians about what to do. So here's your ability to make changes on these devices in this kind of like 1980s style UX.
Right.
But the negative ramifications of making a mistake, and think about yourself, okay, you've been on a 12-hour shift, it's now 3:18 a.m., maybe someone passed away during your shift that you really liked, and you've been cranking through all these patients, and now these alarms are blaring all over the place, and you don't have any guidance about what to do. So you just do what you think is best.
Right.
But the negative ramifications are you could lose your license, or God forbid somebody dies. So that's why it's like most people are just hands off. Like, I'm not going to do anything about it.
Right.
And that's why you have this crazy alarm fatigue issue.
That's interesting.
So that's why we go in with alarm management, because that alarm management is the same problem that exists in enterprise IT.
Yep.
Same problem in healthcare, same problem in energy, manufacturing, defense, any place you have sensors, you're gonna have alarm fatigue.
So is the plan for CalmWave to go across industries?
Yeah.
And you chose healthcare first, you went ICUs first. Since the background of your team is more IT,
Yeah.
right? Like, what's the go-to-market, and like, how do you work your way into something like that? Starting
Yeah.
from scratch. You've done this multiple times.
Yeah, not in healthcare. This is
But
my
not in
first
healthcare,
foray in healthcare.
So what's the strategy, and like, how would someone do that if other people are?
Well, I'll bring it all the way back to the origin story, right? So I talked about joining search and rescue.
Yeah.
The origin of CalmWave comes from my time of search and rescue.
Mm.
Why? Because when you're going on a mission to a subject, they're usually a couple, 3 hours out.
Right.
You're more heavily loaded than when you're hiking. You're trying to move faster than when you're hiking, but you still have time to talk, right? Because you're walking down a trail, trying to get to this person. So there's wonderful people in search and rescue of any organization, right? Because they're there to help. I started talking to doctors and nurses that were part of the Go team, and I started hearing about ICU alarm fatigue. And I was like, I'm a big fan of patterns. And
Yeah.
I like patterns a lot.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, I wonder if this is the same pattern that we solved in enterprise IT. So typically when I go down a path like that, the first thing I do is look up as much academic research and papers that I can find.
Right.
And so for me, what was most telling is that the first paper I found about alarm fatigue was from the 50s.
Wow.
And I saw a huge hockey stick motion in the number of papers written by
75 years ago.
Yeah. Senior nursing leadership.
Yeah.
Writing about alarm fatigue. So there was like a literal hockey stick motion to the number of papers written. So I was like, okay, there's something here.
Right.
And then I thought, as you asked, how do I go from enterprise IT, where I've got a career's worth of capital and connections and everything else, to healthcare where I've got zero, right? That's the question. So I started looking for incubators. I started looking for incubators that had specific focus on AI first principles and healthcare expertise.
Right.
And that's when I was really fortunate to find the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence, AI2, in Seattle. So that was initially set up by Paul Allen.
Yep.
And now funded by his estate. They've got a research arm, which is a world-renowned AI research organization, but then they have an incubator. And it's a phenomenal incubator. Like, this year there were 1,000 applicant companies, of which they chose 12.
Wow.
And what was interesting for me is that at the time, this was in 2022, they had the last 5 companies that had exited were healthcare companies. So I was like, okay, what I need to do now is customer validation. I need to talk to a bunch of chief nursing officers, chief medical officers, whatever. If I'm coming in as, hey, I'm Ophir, I want to come talk to you, that's one thing. If I'm coming in and saying, hey, I'm a researcher from the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence, can I ask you some questions?
Right.
Totally different.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
So you beat the streets. You just got in there to start talking.
I spoke to a lot of people.
And from that point, scaling, like, is it hiring other people that are in the industry that already have relationships that...
Well,
what stage are you guys at as far as...
Oh, no, we're in production now.
Yeah.
In the largest, one of the largest hospital systems in Georgia called Wellstar. They're also a 2-time investor in us, which that should say a lot.
Yep.
We have a published case study showing an over 50% reduction in non-actionable alarms in 6 weeks.
Wow.
We're showing that patients on average in the cardiac care unit are showing 10 full hours less on average of absorption of alarms, from 25 to 14.4 hours. And overall alarm load is dropping from like 1,600 to 800. And we're just getting started.
That's really interesting.
So it's like, currently in the industry, people are like, woohoo, 6% reduction, 7% reduction. We're like half, right?
That's incredible.
And it's because we're doing it in a way that's totally different than what's out there, because you have to be able to fuse these 2 data silos in order to do what we do. You can't do it just from the EMR or just from the vitals.
Right.
On one hand, if you're on the middleware that's aggregating the high frequency vitals, you don't have medications. So how do you know the impact those medications are having on the vitals? If you're the EMR, you don't have the vitals. So what we've done is we've created a novel data set of what's already there to show what we can do.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to back the conversation up a little
Sure.
bit, or actually take it a different direction.
Bring it on.
You and I are both very into systems.
Yes.
And signals. I want to talk about, like, from an operating perspective.
Yeah.
Like, I want to ask you some questions around that, because I just can't stop thinking about that. It's basically in my calling. Because I never asked to do this, by the way. Like, I don't know if that happened to you with any of your companies that you started, but I feel like it wasn't a decision for me. It was just like, hey, you are going to be focused on this the rest of your life. Like, that's kind of, it was not a question. I was just like drawn to it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so mine is systems, signals within operating, specifically in teams that are doing things I've never done before.
Yeah.
Now, for you, I'm curious, you've done this multiple times. How do you take, like, vision to execution?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what are some of the habits or rituals that you are doing, like, on an annual or a quarterly or even a weekly basis with the team?
Yeah.
To go from vision to execution?
Yeah. So I would say we can go meta about how we did that in the existing path, and then also sort of the structure company-wise.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's start with company-wise, right? Like, part of it is the DNA, right? You have to build the right DNA, and that DNA needs to be so profound with the core team that as you build more and more of the company structure, that core DNA is in there.
And what's some of the core DNA for you?
3 foundational traits, right? Foundational values for our company. Number 1, integrity.
Right.
Number 1. Number 2, blunt and open communications. Whatever it is, say what you have to say. And number 3 is a bias for action. Make a fucking decision. I don't care what it is. It can be a wrong decision, but make a decision.
Yes.
And so those 3 are the core DNA to the company. And I feel like that's really, really important.
Yeah.
To have that built in from the beginning.
Right. That's interesting. They reflect, I have 5 behaviors that I think are really important in all high-performing teams. Yeah. Symbiosis. The team has to want to work together.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Communication. Like, we need to be communicating and properly and have communication loops.
Yep.
Alignment. We all need to agree where we're going, and if we don't agree, at least we disagree and commit.
Yep.
Learning loops are so important because everything we're doing is a science experiment. If we don't take those learnings or tracking those learnings, we're not getting
100%.
anywhere. And the last one's empowerment. Like, using all the things that I just talked about in that environment.
Yep.
Make a plan and let everybody run.
Totally.
And I think the more I assess that, and the more I go back to that, like, all of them lead back to that. All of them keep on leading back to that.
Yeah.
You did say one, though, that I think characteristic that's really interesting is that integrity.
Integrity.
Though,
Yeah.
like, that's so essential. And tell me a little bit more about that. Did you have an experience early on one of your other teams where maybe you didn't capture that right away, or maybe you kept someone on longer than you should have?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to go into the specific details of it, but I think that one of the things that is really important to know as a CEO is that you have to trust your gut. If you start feeling like, what is it? Why is this person here? Like, they're bugging me, right? Right. Your gut is telling you they're not the right person. And don't wait. It's not a nice thing.
Right.
It's your job is to make sure that you've honed the diamond so that your company can scale and grow. And if there's pieces of it that aren't working, I mean, it's, it just is what it is, right? You have to excise and then you have to keep going. So, any issues of integrity fall into that category, right? For me.
Right. So once you have the DNA right,
yeah,
and you know what to look for, and you know what to get rid of, like, what's the next step? Yeah, so going from vision to execution.
So the other thing is to make sure that everybody understands the vision and has embraced the vision, right? Like, so for us, for a long time, we did company all hands on Mondays, start of the week. Where I say something, each of the department heads gives a little update to the company, and then another one on Thursday. And then we do demos on Friday, right? Any new stuff across any department, let's see what you got. As we started growing, we pulled out the Thursday.
Right.
In general, meetings for me are max 30 minutes. But the less we can do and still convey the same information, huge win. Like the last all hands that we did on Monday was 17 minutes, but we conveyed a huge amount of information.
That's awesome.
And so what's great about that is that everybody's all about how do we convey this information to everyone, and then our closing is always, all right, let's get back to work, and so that's part of the vibe, right? We're not sitting here to navel gaze.
Yep.
We're cranking on fulfilling this vision, because the vision of CalmWave, right now, you can think about the TAM of healthcare, right?
Yeah.
Pretty big.
It's pretty big.
But what CalmWave has built is a data ingestion normalization platform for operations in any domain, right? So our ingestion layer is all about integrating signals from any high frequency deterministic source, normalizing that data so it's all the same on the inside. Our algorithm engine can run models against the quick format, and it has currently a layer of healthcare on it. But we could just as easily take the existing platform that functions at really good frequency and apply it to energy, right, where they've got SCADA systems and then enrichment from other systems or whatever. And so part of it is for the team to understand the grand vision of what we're building,
right?
But then here's the very specific focus of what we're doing today.
Yeah. So
that people get the big, but then the specific.
Right.
Because we're working on the specific now, but keep in mind, as we're working on the specific, that this actually needs to be able to do this.
I totally believe in that. Part of what I do is I create these cadences, and I have like an annual cadence, a quarterly cadence, and we have a weekly cadence. Teams will thread in other cadences within that. But I think the ability to stop and be present and either give information or collaborate with the information that we have on those sequences are so important for the learning loops, the communication, all those things. But also, I like focal points. And I think of them kind of like signals, right? Like looking for what's the mission's important, like we just talked about, the mission.
Yeah.
I like to create a 3-year vision.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be super complex because it's 3 years out, but it needs to guide us to let everybody know where we're going.
100%.
Because if you don't know where we're going, investors won't care what you're doing. Employees won't know if they want to be with you, right? Then bring it down to the 1-year plan, bring down to 98 OKRs or 180 day based on the team. I find as teams get bigger, the speed in which these cadences or the length of the cadences as they get bigger can be longer.
Right.
Sometimes I have teams doing like OKRs at 180 days at the leadership team level, at 90 on teams below.
Yeah.
But I think that's really important to like really create a mechanism for like it's like a living organism.
Totally.
Now, one thing that you said earlier, and one of my mantras is forward together, collective genius, forward together.
Yep.
We have to make decisions. And I tell people all the time, like, I believe in collaborative environments. And when I'm leading sessions or with teams, I'm like, I believe in collaborative sessions, working together. But it's really important to note there is a hierarchy. And at the end of the day, the CEO gets to make the decision, or they let their next lieutenant down or the next person down make the decision. But we have to make that decision.
Yeah.
I have a team right now. CEO called me up the other day, and they've worked with some facilitators, and they've worked with different processes and systems, and I can tell that they have system fatigue. I can tell they have like facilitator fatigue, and that happens a lot when you bring someone in that's just facilitating that doesn't have experience. But I'm looking at the situation, and they're asking me these questions and saying, what would you do different? What, based on what you're hearing, and I'm like, the problem isn't these people or systems. It's the fact that I think you guys are struggling to make decisions.
Totally.
And why are you struggling to make decisions? And 30 seconds later,
what's the typical reason that you see that people struggle to make decisions? Is it fear?
I don't think they understand sometimes the simple aspect that if I like to use the analogy of peak in our operating system. It's called peak. Yeah. Let's say you and I are going up a hill, and we were like, hey, we're going to get to the top of the hill, and we get up to a point where we're like, oh, wait, there's a ravine here. What are we going to do? We can't get to the top of the hill. Well, we could just choose a direction, or we could sit there and think about it for a long time. Or if maybe if it's just me and you, maybe I go left a little bit, and maybe you go right a little bit, and then we come back and share the information that we just found.
Yep.
I think that's what people don't think about is like, why don't we go scout? So if we're trapped on a situation and we're stuck, maybe there should always be a next step.
Exactly.
Right? And so the next
Even
step
if
is
it's,
go get information.
That's right.
So we can make the decision. And I think some people just don't realize, they just sit and pause.
Right. I mean, in engineering, they call that a spike, right? Like, we don't yet know.
Right.
Let's just spike and dig in, and then figure out where we go from there. And I think that it's a really important process to have built in.
Right.
Right. The other thing that I think is really important, and this is something that was in your book, which I really appreciated, is that notion of the burnout cycle.
Yes.
Right.
Let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, because it's really important, right? Like a lot of people who don't really understand high velocity will try driving the teams really hard all the time. And you can't do that forever.
No.
Right? People burn out, just like nurses in hospital systems burn out.
Right.
That's why we're losing nurses all over the It's the same thing in companies, because you have to say it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And if everything is a sprint, and not in the engineering sprint context, right? But if you're running really, really hard, you can't keep that going. No. People have families, they have lives. And so the goal is save that up for when it's really important, where we're all hands on deck because there's this huge thing that we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
That's a great opportunity to do it.
Right.
But other than that, make sure that, people have lives. They have the ability to rest. They have because this is all very intensive kinds of stuff.
Right. The other thing I think is important to note on that, and I like to think of it like there's a timeline.
Yeah.
And on that timeline, we have only so much energy, each one of us. We have so much capital. Right? We have capital and energy. And I think what's really important is to really define what's the most important things that we want to do.
Yeah.
And everything else we're not going to do.
Right.
And I think what most people do is just prioritize everything, and they forget what they prioritized.
Right.
And so they just start working on everything again.
Totally.
And so that's why I like to really 3-year vision. Give me the top 3 most important things you want to accomplish 3 years out. This is way too many. There's 20.
Right.
Okay, give me 5.
Right.
Let's just keep on bringing this down. One year, we're top 5 things in sales. We're top 5 things in product. 90 days, leadership team. What's the top 5 things we want to focus on? And then we'll put it under a magnifying glass and figure out who's going to do it, how we're going to do it, all that type of stuff. But if you don't ask those questions, I think most teams don't go that next layer down, and that's the problem.
That's right. I mean, it's kind of like the classical, saying, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with 1 step. Right? So you need to know where you're going in your journey of 1,000 miles, but you need to take that 1 step, and then the next step beyond that, and know which direction you're going. So I think that aligns really well with that concept of for every one of these huge journeys, you have to break it down. It can't be too big that you can't actually get your hands around it, but also can't be, I'm just taking the 1 step.
Right. And then you think of sports.
Yeah.
Every sport has either halftime or quarters or periods, where people they pause, they stop, they reflect on the game, what's working, what's not working. Yeah. They make changes to the line, changes to the plays and systems, people, roles, and responsibilities, right? And then they move forward again, and then they pause again, and sometimes they even call timeouts. And so I think what's interesting that I'm seeing across the board on hundreds of CEOs that I'm talked to is they want to go faster. And what I'm telling them, if you want to go faster, you're going to have to stop.
I mean, it's also the classical thing from race car driving, which is something that I did for a while, right? It's
really?
Yeah. If you want to go faster, go slower.
Yeah, slow and
what is that?
Smooth is fast.
And that's actually, it's true. Right?
I have not raced cars. Tell me the context of that. How's that?
So, every probably 2 to 3 years, I choose a new hobby.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I've done race cars. I've been a paraglider, search and rescue. Just things that I feel like it's always really important for you to have new stories. If you don't have new stories, you should really take a look at yourself in the mirror and wonder, why don't I have new stories? Right? So on the race car thing, I also like working on cars, specifically 80s Toyotas. Because that was
real specific.
That was the heyday of Toyota.
Like Camrys?
No, Supras. And now I have a 1985 fully mechanical turbo diesel Land Cruiser.
Oh, cool.
That I take lots of.
What color?
It's sort of a faded copper.
Okay.
Yeah. And I take that.
They had a cool blue back then too. Yeah. I think.
No, this thing is it's look at that thing.
Yeah.
Another robot.
I pick up cats in that and interview them.
So funny. That car was built to be basically the car that was for 60 series Land Cruisers were built. The non-US ones were built for the Australian outback and the African bush, and they were built so that you could always fix them. Unless something catastrophic happens, you're going to make it home.
Yeah.
Because it was built very simply.
Interesting.
That's why it's got a fully mechanical turbo diesel, because it's as long as you give that thing fuel and air, you don't even need to power it. It can run without a battery and get you home. Yeah. Anyways, so the race car thing. Before the Land Cruiser, I had a 1985 Toyota Supra. That was the kind of blocky, angular one that I was in love with in high school, but never had a chance to get one. So I ended up finding one that had 12,000 original miles. pristine condition. Basically, it was locked up in some guy's garage in Washington, D.C. for like 20 plus years. So what I did is I took the next generation Toyota Supra engine, which was a turbo, and put it in this car. So this was a 425 horsepower to the wheel car that weighed 3,000 pounds. So I took it to the track a lot. And one of the things that they say at the track was, you know, imagine that you're in a bathtub with 4 wheels full of water to the brim.
Okay.
And you're trying to navigate the turns that smoothly so you're not spilling any
water out. Okay.
Same kind of thing, right? It's like it's all about the smoothness of the execution.
Right.
I think that that's really important as well.
And to do that, you have to slow things down.
Right.
Yeah, drummers do that too. Like, you know, I play guitar, and I do this. I guess I did it too. Is like you learn a riff, but you learn it real slow.
Exactly.
And even when you got it really good, I've some really good drummers that told me, like, they're practicing, they'll bring it way back down, and if you can slow it down like extremely slow, it's really hard to do something really slow. But there might be something within that too. It's just that then you get the muscle memory.
100%.
Slow it down.
And ultimately you become Neo in the Matrix with bullet time.
Right. All right, I have one last question for you. I could drive around all day until all the batteries in the car die, including the camera batteries. So my last question for you is a really important question. It's probably one of the most important questions you've ever been asked, so I'm glad you're sitting down.
Yeah.
It's more of a situation. You're trapped on a desert island.
Okay.
The rest of your life.
Yep.
You got food, you got water, healthcare, everything you want.
Yep.
Everything.
Yep.
Except one thing.
What?
There is no entertainment on this island.
Okay.
At all. No entertainment.
Yep.
Well, luckily for you, an old 80s boombox drifts ashore.
Very appropriate.
With unlimited batteries.
Yep.
But you can only bring one album to listen to the rest of your life.
Okay.
One album.
Okay.
Any genre, even though it's an 80s boombox.
Yep.
What are you going to bring?
Okay, so here's the background to this. So my wife and I just celebrated 35 years together.
Congrats.
Thank you. Very early in our relationship, we had one album on repeat on a boombox, and that was Soup Dragons, Love God. The song that specifically I like is And I'm Free.
I've never heard of this before.
You should, because the riff there not only applies to that context of my wife and I, but I think it also applies to me as well, because it's and I'm free to do what I want any old time.
Oh, I know that song.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the song.
What's the name of the band?
Soup Dragons.
Soup Dragon.
Right.
I feel like you just made that up, but I know the name of the song.
No, that's it.
Were they a one-hit wonder?
Kind of, yeah. But
we had that tape. I know that song.
Yeah. We had that tape going, like, I don't even know if tapes had repeat, but yeah.
That's
all the time back in the day.
Answer.
Yeah,
that's a great answer.
I'll leave you with the other thing that excites me about what we're doing is that it's all about novel data, right? Because if you think about, like, for example, you know, what's just happened with companies that are a layer around generative AI.
Right.
There's a company called Abridge. They're one of the AI scribes, which were a big hit for doctors, right? We don't have to actually chart. Now the AI can do it for us.
Yep.
But then Epic just came out with their own AI scribe. And what do you think's happening? Epic has 40% of the hospital systems in the country.
100%.
Or more.
Right.
So now it's like, no. But for us, that's why we call ourselves the plumber. For us, it's all about getting that data first.
Right.
And then you can build so many things because now you have a foundational resource.
Right. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's a huge opportunity into the future, what you guys are doing.
It is.
And you can go across industry with it.
Yeah. Imagine the patterns that we'll see across industries where all of the data is normalized.
Yeah. Oh, man.
There you go.
Cool. Hey, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, man.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.